Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today about this really important topic that I've been involved with at FDA for the past decade. I'm sorry that I'm not going to be able to be there in person today, and that I will miss will miss the discussion today. But I am really excited about talking about what we've been doing at FDA over the past decade, and putting this presentation together was a good opportunity for me to reflect back on how far we've come and what the continued challenges are. And this is just the standard disclaimer that I have for my presentation, that the contents are my own and don't necessarily reflect the views or policies of the US FDA. This is the outline for my talk today. I'm going to start by just reminding you what the current approved products are. These are the products that were approved from 2021 to 2023. I'll provide a short background and history that most of you are probably very familiar with. And the challenges and opportunities that I will talk about today focus on clinical pharmacology, because I work in the clinical pharmacology area. And many of the challenges that come up during the development of these long-acting products really are at least partly related to clinical pharmacology. I will show you what the challenges look like in practice. How did the information end up in product labeling? What are the instructions in labeling that are related to the challenges? And what were the review discussions that went on that support the information and labeling? Then I'll leave you with a few conclusions and thoughts about what will happen in the future. So the two products shown here on this slide are the two for HIV treatment. The first is the combination of cabotegravir and rilpivirine extended release, and there are also oral products available, and they are approved as a complete regimen for treatment of HIV infection, and they were initially approved in 2021. The second product, lenacapavir injection, again, there's also an oral product available, and this is indicated in combination with other antiretrovirals, so it's not a complete regimen, and it's for treatment of HIV infection in heavily treatment-experienced individuals who have multi-drug resistance. Cabotegravir extended release injectable suspension for HIV PrEP was also approved. And then finally, nirsevimab injection for prevention of RSV, lower respiratory tract disease in neonates, infants, and then in some populations up to 24 months of age. And I will not be talking about this product further during my presentation. So how did we get here, and why are we interested in long-acting products for HIV? Well, there's been much success in combination antiretroviral therapy, which really revolutionized the treatment of HIV. I've been at FDA for more than 30 years, and just the tremendous progress that we've seen during that time, where really individuals can have a very normal lifespan if they receive adequate therapy. So because of that, they will be on therapy for a very long time. And at that point, the high pill burden is a problem. Many of the products, the oral products, there's a high dosing frequency. And after a while, even once a day is a lot. And suboptimal adherence is a true barrier to achieving the full potential for prevention, and also for adequate treatment strategies. And because of all the success and progress in the HIV area, this has stimulated development for other infectious diseases that could benefit from long-acting products. There have been discussions at multi-stakeholder meetings, for example, the 2023 annual LEAP meeting. And then last year in 2024, there was a meeting focused on development of these products for tuberculosis. And on this slide, I also show two publications in this area, one for tuberculosis and one for treatment of hepatitis C. So there is still, quite a bit of interest in other anti-infective areas, which is the topic of the meeting today. So I want to cover, what has FDA been doing, and how have we been communicating our thoughts during the development of these products? And there are three publications that I would like to point out in this area. And they are from individuals in the Division of Infectious Disease Pharmacology, where I work, and also the Division of Antivirals in the Office of New Drugs. So those are the medical officers, the clinicians who work in this therapeutic area. The first publication was in 2015, so this was very early in the time that we were working on these efforts, and just our initial thoughts on what some of the challenges might be. The next publication was in 2019, and at that point, we've been working with drug sponsors quite a bit more. The clinical trials that support the products you'll hear about today were well underway at this time, so we had seen the challenges in action. And then the final publication was in 2022. And at this point, we had much more experience with data that were coming in. And were the challenges that we initially anticipated, were they really still challenges? And the answer is yes, they were still challenges, but we understood much better how to deal with them. So in the publications, these are the challenges and opportunities that were identified. And as I indicated, these are areas where clinical pharmacology really does play a role. First, like as with any other product, you need to identify an appropriate dosing regimen. So the process is fairly similar to what we would do with other antiviral products, with a little bit of difference as far as the duration, and it is maybe a little bit more difficult to get actual clinical data early on looking at the appropriate dosing regimen, and much more role of modeling and simulation. The publications also talk about the utility of an oral short-acting drug, and in some cases, the short-acting drug might just assist during drug development and answer some of the clinical pharmacology questions, such as drug interaction liability, whether there are specific populations that need to receive a different dose. Or in some cases, the short-acting drug might be part of the approved dosing regimen, either as part of a loading dose or initiation regimen, or to help if there are missed doses. The question of the impact of missed doses comes up, even though these are long-acting drugs. There may be times that, or various scenarios where an injection may be missed. In some cases, it can be anticipated and planned around. And in some cases, an individual may just not show up for their injection. So we need different strategies to address these missed doses. And again, because these are long-acting products, once the dosing stops, there will be residual systemic exposure following the end of therapy. This could lead to emergence of resistance, and it's something to think about is the duration of drug interaction risk. So these are the challenges that were identified early on. We've dealt with them for all of the products that are approved today. And so we have a better understanding of how to deal with them, but the challenges have not gone away. So next, I'm going to talk about the challenges in practice. So what information has ended up in labeling, and then I will also talk about our considerations during regulatory review. How did we determine what information ended up in labeling, and also how did this inform us as we interact with industry moving forward for additional products? I'm going to focus for the most part on the co-administered cabotegravir rilpivirine for treatment of HIV, because that was the first one where we gained a lot of experience. And then I'll talk about two other products and really how what we learned from this first program, how it informed those programs. So first, this is information that is in product labeling. These are the topics that show up. So the current product labeling for this co-package includes either monthly or twice monthly dosing schedules. There are adherence considerations that impact whether or not a patient would receive once or twice monthly. And there are also instructions for switching if it's determined that the initial regimen selected does not work for the patient. It describes the optional oral lead-in dosing, which is used to assess tolerability, and also the recommended dosing schedule for missed injections. And there are separate instructions for either the monthly or the twice monthly injections. The labeling talks about the use of other antiretroviral agents after discontinuation of this product. If it's determined that a patient will no longer receive this product, there are residual concentrations. However, they are not expected to affect the exposures of other antiretroviral drugs after discontinuation. So that is described in labeling. There's a section on established and other potentially significant drug interactions, which is similar to what you would see in any other HIV product label. And then there's pediatric use information that describes the specific data that support the use in adolescent patients. So for this product, as I indicated, the regulatory review documents do support labeling. And in case you're not aware, many of our reviews are publicly available. They are redacted to some extent, but you can really get a better understanding of our thought process for how information ended up in labeling and how we determined what the pros and cons are for the particular product. So at the bottom, I have the link that shows you how you can find this is the review for the initial approval of cabotegravir rilpivirine. And since this was the first approved long-acting product in the antiviral therapeutic area, the dosing instructions did change over several years. So the initial approval, which was for once monthly dosing with oral lead-in required for adult patients, that was in January of 2021. The allowance for dosing every 2 months was added about a year later, and this was based on clinical data. And then the oral lead-in became optional instead of required in March of 2022, and this again was based on clinical data. And then dosing in adolescents was approved later in March in 2022, again based on clinical data. However, each one of these steps, it was based on additional clinical data, as I indicated. But because of what we learned during this program, it really did inform, how we approached the next products that were available. And in some cases, there was less clinical data required because of the understanding that we acquired during this review process. So dose selection is described in the regulatory review documents for this combined product, and cabotegravir included cabotegravir rilpivirine co-administered includes a new molecular entity, cabotegravir. So the dose selection was pretty similar to what you would see for any other new molecular entity. Virology information, human pharmacokinetics, exposure response data, and that supported the doses that were evaluated from phase 1b through phase 3. In some cases, some of this information was obtained using the oral formulation instead of the injection. Then rilpivirine had been previously approved as an oral formulation, so it needed less information for dose selection, and exposure response information from the oral development program contributed here. And then the phase 2 results plus modeling and simulation supported the dose that was selected for phase 3. I mentioned that it could be a concern regarding the cabotegravir and rilpivirine concentrations after discontinuation because of the long half-life. So we needed to address the potential for drug interactions during that time. And in this case, the conclusion was there was not a concern for either direction of drug interaction, either the potential for these products to affect other drugs or for other drugs to affect cabotegravir and rilpivirine after the discontinuation. But that was based on really an in-depth review of what the expected concentrations would be over time. There is a concern for development of resistance. The decline in concentrations after discontinuation, when that was predicted, it indicated that it's really important that a suppressive regimen needs to be started within 30 days after the last injection, or there is a potential for drug resistance. There's a discussion about how we determine the missed injection strategy. Simulations did support this, and those simulations are described in the review. For planned missed injections, there's a discussion of how the oral bridging regimen was determined. And for unplanned missed injections, when a patient just doesn't show back up at the clinic for their injection, they require a clinical reassessment because there could be many different reasons that they did not show up. Maybe they aren't a candidate anymore for this type of product. And so dosing recommendation is also based on the time since the last injection. And finally, the drug interaction information. The review explains the reliance on drug interaction studies conducted with the oral cabotegravir and rilpivirine. So there were not any new drug interaction studies conducted for the injections, and that is explained in great detail in the review. So next, I'm going to talk about the cabotegravir for HIV PrEP. And again, the regulatory review documents support the labeling. So at the bottom, I have the link to the NDA review from December of 2021. It describes the dose selection for the phase 3 trials, and much of it was based on target concentrations. And this leaned heavily on information that was collected during the cabotegravir rilpivirine combined product drug development program. In this case, the oral lead-in dosing is optional, and it was optional from the first approval. However, it was not studied clinically because of the overlap in the cabotegravir rilpivirine program and the cabotegravir HIV PrEP program. It was not yet known when the clinical trials were started for this product that the oral lead-in would be optional for the treatment program. So based on what was learned during that program, even though the phase 3 clinical trials did include the oral lead-in, the initial approval indicated that it's optional. And then the dosing instructions for the adolescent population, even though they really were not included in the phase 3 trials, there's some support from the HIV treatment studies. In addition, it links to adult data for HIV PrEP. So the last product I'm going to talk about is lenacapavir. So this is a long-acting injection for treatment of patients with drug-resistant HIV. Once again, the regulatory review is linked at the bottom. And there are many similarities with the cabotegravir rilpivirine program. Any difference are really because of the indication, which are heavily treatment-experienced patients, which leads to the requirement for administering in combination with other antiretrovirals. So important topics in this review include the dose selection, the overall dose selection, and the fact that there are two options for the initiation regimen. And I'll explain that more on the next slide. So this regimen includes, there's an initiation regimen followed by a maintenance regimen. The missed injection strategy, the review documents includes information fairly similar to what's included in the other product labels. And there's also a similar discussion of the residual concentrations after discontinuation, which leads to the need to start another fully suppressive regimen within 28 days after discontinuation. And that is described in the review. So the review topic that I'd like to focus on for lenacapavir is the fact that there are two options for initiation regimen. So there's one regimen that was evaluated in the phase 2-3 study, which is oral lenacapavir on day 1, oral lenacapavir on day 2, and also on day 8. And then the first subcutaneous injection is on day 15. So this regimen requires a second visit to the clinic. So a patient would be there on the first day when they receive the prescription for this, and then they would have to come back on day 15 to get the subcutaneous injection. And then there was a simplified regimen that the applicant proposed when they submitted the NDA, and that was for on day 1, there would be oral dose and also a subcutaneous dose. And then at home, they could take the second oral dose on day 2. And then there would be no need to come back until the monthly injections would start. And this was not studied in the phase 3 clinical trials, and the dosing regimen was based on population PK simulations. There was quite a bit of discussion about two different topics. One, is the simplified regimen okay? Is it acceptable? Do the data support it? And if it is acceptable, what goes in the label? Should we include just the simplified regimen because it seems easier for the patients? Or is there a reason to include both regimens? So the review describes the quantitative assessment, and the conclusion there was that the data support the simplified regimen in addition to the studied regimen. And it also describes the thought process we went through, that the review team went through for the options and label decision. And in the end, the review team decided to include both options in the labeling to allow the provider and the patient to select really the best option for their individual circumstances. And the review lays out the pros and cons for each one. The biggest concern with including both of the regimens in the label was that it might be too complicated. There might be misunderstandings, but it only covers at the very beginnings. So this concern would be gone after the decision is made. So it only needs to be read through in the label once, and then you move on to the maintenance dosing. The concern with only including the simplified regimen was that because it was based on modeling, there may be some clinicians who are uncomfortable with that. Although we felt that it was fully supported based on the population PK simulations. That doesn't mean that the clinician would feel the same way. So just to avoid that type of concern, we decided to put both regimens in the label. So in conclusion, the approved long-acting anti-infective products demonstrate the benefits of the products and also the challenges during development. So all of the challenges that I talked about, even though we got through them for the particular products that are approved, they still exist. And you can see the thought process that we go through during the review process. And each development program contributes to the body of scientific knowledge and the regulatory review process, so it benefits the next products that are coming along. You saw the difference from the combined cabotegravir-rilpivirine program, which at each step it relied on clinical data, where we didn't have to rely fully on clinical data for the later programs. And multi-stakeholder meetings, such as this one, really can influence the development of the long-acting products for additional infectious diseases. So I hope that you have a very good discussion today and tomorrow, and that working together, the various stakeholders can really pave the path for product development in this area. I'm sorry I can't be there in person and participate in the question and answer, and I hope that I can find a way to maybe answer some of the questions by email if they come up. So I thank you very much for your attention and wish you a good meeting. Thank you.